Okay.
All right, everyone, I think we're going to get started for our 11 o'clock lecture, Domestic Violence and Human Trafficking. I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for this talk. Tamika McCoy is the Advocacy Program Manager and also implements, develops, and oversees the violence prevention programming. She provides confidential advocacy support to students who have experienced sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking, or harassment. Tamika informs students of their rights and options, assists them with navigating and connecting to resources. Tamika supports students who are involved in Title IX criminal investigation processes and provides accompaniments to incident-related appointments. She also trains faculty, staff, and students on violence prevention, consent, and other advocacy-related topics. Dana provides confidential support to students who have experienced sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking, or harassment. She informs students of their rights and options and assists them with navigating and connecting to resources such as Title IX criminal investigation, academic accommodations, and other resources. Dana is passionate about creating a safer campus and creates violence prevention programs regarding consent, healthy relationships, communication, and more. Dana obtained her Master of Social Work degree with a graduate certificate in gender violence intervention from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2019. Welcome.
Is this where you told us to stay? Oh, God, it's working. Hello. Hi there. Okay.
Yeah, we're not used to having fancy mics. This is
I know,
exciting.
we're not used to this at all. Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
It's awesome to see your smiling faces. I feel so important with this non-handheld mic. Go ahead,
I
Dana.
know. So we had the pleasure of being introduced, but to kind of really sum up what we do really quickly, Tamika and I serve students in a confidential capacity on campus. So while we are in the counseling center, we don't actually provide therapeutic resources to students. We work with students more on like a case management level. So they come in, let us know about an experience they had regarding gender-based violence, and then we kind of sit with them and help them navigate what comes next. That could be as simple as saying, like, this is it. I'm going to tell you my story, and I never want to talk about this again. Or it could go as far as a criminal investigation. We've been to court more times this year than I think either of us are able to count.
In our lives.
Yeah, so we feel really lucky to be able to support students in that way.
Exactly.
So that's just a really brief introduction to what we do.
Okay, let's get into the difference between domestic violence and human sex trafficking. Number one, what we need for you to understand about domestic violence, we call them respondent, but I've worked as an investigator for a long time, and for us, it was perpetrator. So for all intents and purposes, it's going to be perpetrator for me this morning. However, the perpetrator is known to the victim. There's some kind of relationship, whether it is a romantic partnership or it could be a marriage. And they are all about power and control. That's it. I need to have control over you. I need to have power over you at all costs. And so, of course, this can include intimidation. This can include physical violence. It can include manipulation and all kinds of things that are against the law, including but not limited to financial or emotional abuse. Now, when it comes to human sex trafficking, it's a little bit different because there could be multiple unknown perpetrators. Human trafficking, of course, you've probably heard this since you've been in the Symposium, it's big business. A lot of people run these things like they are a corporation, okay? So that's one of the major differences. And then the survivor is bought and sold. In domestic violence, it's normally between a victim or a survivor and one person. However, in human sex trafficking, the survivor is the commodity. They are the moneymaker. They have to be kept under control because they are considered property. They're not considered to be human. Of course, they're a larger part of an economy and easily disposable, okay?
And so while there are some important differences with human trafficking, and human sex trafficking specifically is what we're going to focus on in domestic violence, we also know that there can be some overlap that makes it really difficult to determine, if they're surviving one or the other or both. And so, for example, we know that sometimes abusers will traffic out their partner. Right? And so that is an example of both a domestic violence situation and a human trafficking situation. Or we know that in some marriages, right, there can be forced labor. And so that is then an example of human labor trafficking as well as domestic violence. So while we think it's really important to kind of separate this out, in real life, it's really hard to do that when they do start to overlap. So some differences in perpetrators. So we know that in both situations, the perpetrator gains kind of the trust of the survivor. So in a human trafficking situation, that might be someone befriending, maybe someone's homeless on the street, right? And that's the first person that's been kind to them, and that offers them a chance for, economic empowerment. Or in a romantic situation, that can be someone really likes me, they start to date me, they make me feel really good about myself, right? So usually it starts on that notion of trust. It's not usually like Taken, right? That does happen, but here that we see with students, that's not what we're seeing. And then like Tamika mentioned, for domestic violence, motive is power and control on that individual level, right? I'm exerting power over you to help me feel good about myself and to take some of my needs into consideration. But we know with human trafficking, the motive is still power and control, but for that person to have a larger stake in this large economy that we're talking about. And so, but in both, we know that that survivor can still be manipulated by the hope of a relationship, the hope for love, right? The hope for economic empowerment. So again, we're seeing this really interesting overlap that often happens that we don't always talk about.
All right, so let's talk about the power and control wheel. Now, as you can see, this is the sex trafficking wheel, and honestly, there are several wheels out there. Okay, we even created one for you all that you all should have. So, but as far as sex trafficking is concerned, I want you to look at some of the things, and this is that overlap that Dana was talking about, because a lot of times these things do overlap. And so some of these, if you put the domestic violence, power and control wheel, and this together, a lot of these things will overlap. Like the economic abuse can overlap, the sexual abuse can overlap, the isolation, using of privileges, emotional abuse, economic abuse, a lot of those things can overlap. But the main thing as far as this wheel is concerned is to make sure that there is power and control over the survivor so that money can be made. So that bottom line motive is always money for the human trafficker or the labor trafficking.
And if you've never seen a power and control wheel before, this is something that Tamika and I work with a lot with our students. There's also a domestic violence one that we're going to get to in just a second. But the point of the wheel is to say that there are these different spokes that people engage in to maintain power, right? So a lot of times when we're thinking of domestic violence or human trafficking, we're thinking they're being physically abused or sexually abused. Yes, that typically is happening. But what we also know is that there's coercion and threats. There's intimidation. And when we start to layer things, these different aspects on top of each other, imagine how difficult it would be for someone to leave, right? If they're being isolated, they have no economic standing, right? They feel like this is their fault. Why would we think it would be easy for them to leave this situation? So this wheel really helps us understand that power and control is the main culprit when we're talking about human trafficking, when we're talking about domestic violence. And so some things that you might notice if you do one-to-one patient care, let's talk about physical abuse, for example. You might see a patient that has been branded. You may see a patient who is drugged because they're forced into submission. That might be where you see a little bit of a difference between human trafficking and domestic violence. It could still happen with both, but drugging is a little bit more common in a human trafficking type situation. And also think of isolation, right? With a human trafficking situation, there is a lot more control over that day-to-day life. Happens a lot in domestic violence too, but we see that there's a little bit more flexibility as long as there are kind of check-ins with that perpetrator. But with human trafficking, the victim might not even be able to go to any public space by themselves. So if you're in a room with someone who you are getting kind of this vibe that there's something going on, you might notice that the perpetrator or the pimp or whatever you want to call them, the trafficker in the room, is refusing to leave, that they wait until the physical abuse is so bad until they allow them to seek medical care, right? So these are some of the differences. Like, we're talking really theoretically, but we also want to give really concrete examples. So if you're seeing these things, they start to maybe trigger an alarm for you to say, like, something here isn't quite right. And so I explained really briefly the power and control wheel for domestic violence, but really we're looking at a lot of the same things. We know that domestic violence doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we also know that the motivation is never love or jealousy or someone who just really, really cares about you, right? We know that the method that people use is power and control. They use intimidation and isolation, physical and sexual abuse to make sure that they have a super strong hold on that survivor, or maybe on a whole group of survivors, right? If we're thinking of a larger familial situation. So Tamika's going to give some examples.
So I'm going to give you some examples. Now, we all know what physical abuse is, and like Dana stated before, you may see the signs of physical abuse when you're in an examination or talking to a person. But there are also signs of physical abuse sometimes you may not see right offhand, because a lot of times until you get into the actual evaluation, you may see bruises on the torso or the back or places where a perpetrator would not want you to see bruises. So when you see these things, of course, it's always appropriate to ask questions and try to find out what's going on. One of the other examples I'd like to give you, a lot of times, the sexual violence. A lot of people, there are some cultures that believe that sexual violence in a romantic relationship or a marital relationship is non-existent, but we know that that's not true. We had a saying when I worked for the military: no means no whether we're married or not. No means no whether we're in a relationship or not. And so a lot of times you may run across people who have experienced marital rape or rape or sexual assault by an intimate partner. That does happen. And if the person says, I did not want to do it, or I was coerced or forced to do this sex act or do whatever this person wanted me to do sexually, yes, that is considered sexual violence as part of the domestic violence power and control wheel. And all of these things are working together to make sure that that person, that perpetrator, has power and control over that the survivor. And also they use all kinds of things. Of course, there's the economic abuse. They use the money, because in some situations you're going to have perpetrators who they have all the money. They have all the power. They're the one carrying the insurance. They have all the control. The survivor has no idea what the financial circumstances are. That may be a little bit harder to see because you're in an examination or you're seeing them in a different capacity, but these things do exist. And the thing I want you to understand is that it may be more than one part of the wheel in action here, okay? Because a lot of times I worked domestic violence as a victim advocate for the military for 5 years, and what I noticed was a lot of times in these situations, one always accompanies the other. There may be physical violence, but there's some emotional abuse attached to it. There may be some emotional abuse attached to it, but then there's also some isolation. So a lot of times you'll find a person who is experiencing more than one thing or more than one aspect of the power and control wheel.
And what we know specifically for survivors or victims of human trafficking is that this abuse happens like very quickly, and it's very, very scary, right? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, and that these different types of violence happen really in unpredictable ways. So it's not that there's this cycle of abuse where it's like every Friday at 5, right? I know my husband's going to come home and something's going to happen. Abusers purposefully do things at an unpredictable time to make it like really confusing, right? There's something that we didn't put up a graphic for this, but something that I work with a lot with students is this cycle of abuse. And so we know that at first, things are good. Whatever, it's either the relationship has just started or, we've just met. And then there's kind of this building tension that tends to happen. And in that case, it feels like survivors are walking on eggshells. And then there's the precipitating event. So whether that was, a strong financial abuse or actual physical assault or sexual assault. And then we know after that, people go into the honeymoon phase. And so then the abuser is apologizing for their actions. They're saying they'll never do it again. They bring gifts. They do anything to try to bring that person back in so that they can maintain that power and control. And then that cycle starts again. So then we're kind of at this plateau, and then we go to the it all happens again. And what we know is it happens faster and faster and faster and faster. So at first, it might be 6 months between each section. By the end, it could be 6 days, 6 hours. So know that, too, that it's not always this really easy path to see because people are so manipulated during what's happening.
And I also like to add, in my work with survivors, what I have learned in just interviewing and talking to different people is that they can be in the tension building phase, but it's so much tension, they would rather go ahead and do something to get to the actual event so that, guess what, I can get back to the honeymoon phase, because that's where I feel good. That's why I'm lovable, and that's when I'm getting the gift, so that's when I'm treated at least somewhat fairly. So a lot of times survivors, when they are in that phase, they're walking on eggshells, they're very nervous. So I've had people to tell me, Tamika, I would just do something. I would cook something I know they didn't like so I can go ahead and get it over. Because I would rather be in this phase, the honeymoon phase, rather than walk on eggshells, because I know that something's going to happen. And that's the thing. Most of our survivors, whether it's human trafficking or whether it's in a domestic violence situation, they know eventually something is going to happen. So a lot of times in the back of their mind, let me go ahead and get this over with. I know I'm going to get hit. I know I'm going to get called a name. I know I'm going to get pushed to the ground. I know I'm going to get cursed out. Let me go ahead and let's just get this over with so we can get back to this honeymoon phase, because they would rather stay there than to be in any other part. So that's the thing that I want you guys to remember, because a lot of times you're going to run into people that are desperately trying to get back to that state of the honeymoon phase because they know that they feel a little bit safer right there.
And what we know about this cycle, too, is that the most dangerous time for a survivor of domestic violence, and I would imagine that this would also be the case for survivors of human trafficking, is the most dangerous time is when they do decide to leave. Right? So think of all of these different ways that abuse occurs, and then someone finally says, okay, that's it, I've had enough, and they leave. The abuser now has nothing to lose. Right? So we know that the rates of fatality are astronomical for survivors when they choose to leave. So that's why it's so important that we're not just pressuring people, just leave, you'll be fine, right? We have to kind of develop these wraparound services, and we'll talk about what you can do in a minute here, but to develop these wraparound services so when they leave, and they can actually get out. Because we know that they return to their abusers, what is it, 7 to 10 times before it's officially done.
7. Absolutely.
So unfortunately, there is a huge stigma around human sex trafficking because people try to conflate it with prostitution or sex work. And we know that there's just, on its own, a lot of stigma for sex work, right? And so the real main difference, and we're not going to focus on this super harshly, but the real difference between human trafficking and sex work is that sex workers are voluntarily entering that economy. Now, it might not be ideal that they're entering that economy. There could be like some economic pressures that they're experiencing, like homelessness, drug abuse, things like that. So I don't mean freely in that sense. But we know that victims of human trafficking do not have the ability to freely or safely leave. If they leave, their life is at risk, right? They'll either be dragged back into the situation and brutally beaten, brutally harmed, right? Or they might just be killed because they are part of that more disposable economy. Sex workers, while they still do face some of those dangers, it's on a different scale. So it's really important that whatever your personal views of prostitution or sex work is, to really put that aside, because we know that since these things get conflated, victims or survivors of human trafficking are less likely to come forward because they're afraid of being called prostitutes or they're afraid of being called sex workers, right? Even if it seems like they're voluntarily doing it, even if they've developed a relationship with their pimp or trafficker, it is still on a much different level. Victims of human trafficking are completely dependent on their trafficker to live, to survive, to make money. It's a little bit different for sex workers.
So let me give you some examples. And the reason why I want to bring this to light is because a lot of times in our mind, and this is in my own mind, we have an idea of what a survivor looks like, or even what a pimp looks like. Now, when I was growing up, I don't know, everybody grew up in a different area in a different time, but you know, back in my day, we could tell a pimp where I was from. I could tell. Like, I knew he had a pinky painted, he dressed a certain way, and it was my idea of what I saw on TV and what I saw just growing up. But what I need for you to realize is pimps can come into your office with a survivor in a suit. They can also they also have regular jobs, and I'll give you an example. There was a case with a Navy personnel. He was a captain in the Navy, but he was sex trafficking a 17-year-old girl. Decorated soldier, put on that uniform every day, but he was sex trafficking. But when it was initially reported, no one could fathom that a captain, not at the Navy, would be sex trafficking someone. But yeah, it happens. So, and your survivors are not going to look the same. They're not. They may look like me. They may look like you. They may look like you. They may be male. Or they could be, identified male, identified female. They can come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. They're not all dirty. Some are dressed. You may have someone coming in a Chanel suit. You never know. So what we're asking you to do is when you see the signs, don't look at the outward appearance. And if something doesn't feel right, or you have an inkling that something may be going on, then of course, as a professional, you are mandated to do whatever you need to do to report this or offer the victim some help or whatever you need to do, because they may look like you or they may not look like you. But whatever preconceived notions we have as to how they are dressed or how they present themselves, they're not all drug addicts. Some people are trafficking, they're not on drugs. Some people are in domestic violence situations and they look just like us. Do I look like I've been in a domestic violence situation? No, right? But I was for 12 years, going to work every day. And I look like this, and I'm loud and I'm boisterous. But for 12 years, someone was abusing me in my home. So I said that to say that we cannot look at, oh, well, I don't think, they're not being abused, or that may not be it. Look at the way they're dressed. And we don't physically say those words, but those are the notions that we have. So I want you to be very careful when you're doing that, because they can look like any of us, okay?
And just to add to that point, we also know that both perpetrators for human trafficking and domestic violence target people that have complex trauma and complex histories, right? So I know if some of you were just in the session with Alex Wagaman, she talked about LGBTQ youth and human trafficking. It's a huge risk factor, right? We know folks who are homeless or folks who have already experienced abuse in their past are more susceptible to being pulled in, right? Not their fault. The perpetrators are very smart. So just know that like there are people coming in with already complex trauma and then add this situation on top of it. And so their responses may not be logical or make sense to you. And we're actually just about to talk about that.
Right.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
That's okay. So we're going to talk about survivor responses. Now, you're examining a person or you're interviewing a person or you come into contact with this person and they just seem numb. Like, this is not even bothering me. Like, I'm just here. That happens. Agitation, sadness. But a lot of times you may not get a person that's sad. You may have a person that's going to outright lie. They'll have a black eye. They'll have bruises. Well, what's wrong? Oh, I fell down the steps. I walked into the doorknob. I was flailing my arms and made a mistake and hit my own self in the face. I mean, you're going to have people who are trying to protect the pimp or the perpetrator, but they're really trying to protect themselves because they feel like you can't protect me. I have to go home with this person. I have to deal with this person. And unless you can tell me you can get me out of here right now and I will not have to see this person again, I'm going to do what I have to do. I will lie. Okay? Then, of course, they'll be non-compliant because guess what? That's what they've been trained to do. Don't you let them examine you. You're just telling you need some medication and go. If they ask you something wrong, you better not say anything. So they've been trained to do that. And then, of course, there are those who are just going to be outright belligerent with you. You're trying to do an examination. Yes, may I touch your arm? Don't touch me. Get your hands off of me. They're angry, they're upset. And as a professional, sometimes you're trying to figure out, I'm just trying to help. But they're not seeing that because in the back of their minds, you can't protect me. There's nothing you can do for me. So we have to be very careful with that. Of course, they'll just deny, which is the same thing. They in all of this is a denial of their situation. Because guess what? Going back to what I said before, they feel like you can't protect them and they have to go home with that person.
And so these could be both survivors and human trafficking of human trafficking and domestic violence. But we know specifically with human trafficking, I'm getting all my words mixed up, y'all. It's hump day. That there is this sense of disorientation, right? So especially if someone has been trafficked and they've been moved across state lines, or that they don't have access to like technology and things like that, they may not know why they're seeing you. They may not know where they are. They might not be able to tell you anything about their history. So just know that if someone seems like super disoriented, it may come across as belligerent or non-compliant or things like that. But just kind of take that into consideration that if someone can't even tell you like why they're in DCU today or what city that they're in, huge, huge red flag.
Absolutely.
And we put the word non-compliant on here because that's a term that people love to just like slap on people. Like, well, they were non-compliant, so I did my job and I moved on. And what we know about human trafficking and domestic violence is that it takes multiple touches. You're probably not going to get someone, if it's the very first time they're ever seeking help, who's like, yep, great, you're right. I'm a survivor of domestic violence and I need to get out. Right? It takes your compassionate touch, the fact that you care and that you're asking them like open-ended questions and being really considerate. And then maybe it's the next doctor or the next social worker that they're interacting with. And it's kind of building that trust of systems because there's this severe distrust of institutions. That's what they've been told by their traffickers is that you can't trust them. You can only trust me. I'm the only one who can keep you safe. You just have to do what I say. So in your kind of small groups, if you want to really quickly discuss this case study we've put together for you, and then in like 2 minutes, we'll take some thoughts out to the group. So go ahead and read these. So we're going to put up some questions. Has everyone had a time or had a chance to read the case study? Great.
All right, so does any table want to tell us what red flags do you notice? What do you see initially? Not everybody at once.
Control. Heard that?
I heard control. What else? I'm sorry, ma'am. What was that?
Trauma without explanation.
Trauma without explanation. There's no explanation. What do you mean? Next. What else? What else? Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
She said trauma with no explanation. What else did we notice?
An older man with a young girl.
Yes.
Very good.
Big one.
And he can't provide what? Documentation. Parents in this room, when we take our kids to the doctors, what happens? Hey, I'm digging in my purse. I got birth certificates. I got records. I got shots from when she was in kindergarten and she's 18. I got it all. We don't have anything? What else did we notice? Yes.
His behavior.
Absolutely.
Okay. And can you expand on that? What about his behavior is concerning to you?
Mine's broken.
I can share my mic too.
I know, right?
Take care of me. Okay.
You want to use mine?
Yeah, it should. Can you lean into it a little bit?
Hello.
There it is.
Yeah, even though it's red, it's
She's going to say it over the mic.
as it's described.
Here, use my mic.
Yeah. Argumentative.
Yep.
His behavior is argumentative, defensive, and demanding.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And
Cooperative.
Uncooperative.
uncooperative. So all of these things are red flags because you can't give me any paperwork. You're defensive, you're demanding, and then of course we go back to the person, our young person is refusing to give any more information. That is more than a red flag. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a red blanket. That's a lot.
And we
in
all
one
know that there are
scenario.
those parents that are just ugh, to deal with, right? This is past that.
Yeah.
Someone who's not even willing to engage with you at all is past that annoying parent. Okay, so just keep that in mind too.
So let's talk about resources you would utilize for this. Who do we call? How do we even begin to refer or to try to handle this? Who wants to try to answer that? You're in the situation, all of these things just happen. You walk out of the exam room, what do we do?
And you can think too, what are your immediate resources? So don't
Right.
even, not just immediate hotlines. Yeah, social worker.
Social worker. What else? Yes.
Okay, so let's get clever and try to see if we can't do a test with that patient by herself.
Hmm.
That's
Okay,
excellent.
the nurse speaking for,
Yeah.
Well, let's see, can we provide some privacy for this patient by saying we need to take her to have some test done and
Yeah.
we'll bring her right back?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so try to get the patient by themselves to see if you can gain some more information.
Absolutely. Who else? Somebody else said something? Yes.
You may want to alert security.
Absolutely.
Bring them up immediately that there's a situation happening, so they might be able to immediately respond.
So just kind of
Absolutely.
keep security on standby. Yeah, absolutely.
Because in this situation, because he cannot produce any paperwork, I want to point out that the social services, what everyone is saying is exactly true, and especially the police. I have a 14-year-old with no ID, and a person who can't produce anything. That is huge. I would definitely be calling social work services. I'd definitely be calling the police because there's definitely something wrong, especially if they try to leave, if they figure out you're trying to call someone, yeah, then there's definitely something wrong. These are all great answers.
And in this situation, particularly because this person is a minor, it's more appropriate to take more firm action. If you were dealing with an adult, you have to kind of reassess that situation, right? Because you don't want to strip them of their power and their self-determination. I'm coming to you. But because this is a minor, you're mandated, I would assume you're mandated reporters
Absolutely.
if you're a doctor,
Yeah,
or
they
if you're
are.
working in healthcare.
So automatically, you would also call Child Protective Services as
Yeah.
well then?
You would at least engage your supervisor. I think that's the first step is consult with someone who can give you that clear answer, because the reason we didn't put firm resources up here is because we know everyone's a little bit different. Tamika and I are confidential on our campus. So unless someone's at super, super high risk, we're not mandated to report, but we know other folks have different circumstances.
How do you ensure, and I don't even know if there is a way to ensure this, that there's no backlash when you're introducing these social workers, or if the trafficker is seeing a police officer walking nearby, I don't know if
I would say
it's a
engage
great
security
question.
immediately. Before you even start the process, I would have security on standby. Because if they become a threat to you or anyone in that building, that's what the security is for, to kind of avoid that backlash, and also police or any kind of authority of that nature. You want to have them right there on standby in case something happens. When I was doing investigations for Richmond City, I'll give you an example, and we had cases like this come up, and I would have to respond from 900 Marshall Street and come straight to VCU, and I remember the police were already there. And they go, oh yeah, Ms. McCoy, we already called the police. They're here because we think something is wrong, blah, blah, blah. Their parent even blinks wrong, get on the ground. So, yeah,
and
I
you
would definitely
can't.
do that.
The answer to that question is you cannot stop backlash from happening. What you can hopefully do is engage the right resources that can provide those wraparound services. I know a lot of times when we're working with survivors, there's this like immense, like I've had this like immense feeling of responsibility and guilt. It's like, you know, I can, you know, try to talk to you and work with you, but like I can't guarantee your safety. Like you're not home with that person. And so really doing the best that you can is the best we have right now. Engaging whatever resources are available to you, following up with that patient if you have the ability to, or getting a social worker, or, you know, trying to think outside the box too, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of protocols for how exactly to engage with folks without putting them at higher risk, because we can't guarantee that. So we had one really great answer for this third one. So what could you do or say to make sure the trafficker and the child in the situation stay until someone can help you, right? So sometimes we just have to delay. So I heard, see if we can get a private exam done. What are some other things you might be able to do to delay?
Say that you're waiting for test results.
Say that you're waiting for test results.
That's my
yeah.
favorite.
No one goes to the doctor and is in and out in 15 minutes, let's be real. Anybody else?
Have they had food sent to their rooms? Something like that?
Food, great.
That's my other favorite.
I know that you can like normalize the wait.
Okay.
So like I know at the peds ED at VCU, like every single burn peds, no matter how they got the burn, has to wait and be evaluated. And so sometimes saying like this is standard protocol, everyone receives this, like can help normalize like social work getting involved.
Yeah, that's awesome. Make like passing off the buck, right? Like, oh, I have to do this. This is part of my job.
Yeah. We're almost done. We're almost done. You just keep
Yeah.
saying almost done every 5 minutes. Yeah.
Anything else before we move on? Cool.
All right. You guys did a great job on that. Thank you.
So we want to kind of leave you with some practical skills when you're working with survivors. And so the first thing is to be knowledgeable about the resources that are available to you. So knowing, you know, maybe running with your supervisor, like, if this happens, what is the protocol? Like, what am I supposed to do? How do I get in contact with social services? Should I be calling the police? Everyone's got a little bit different of a protocol. Safe Harbor is a resource in Henrico County, but they will accept folks in Richmond and Chesterfield counties, and they actually have the hotline that you can call. They have caseworkers that work with human trafficking, so they're also a really great person to just kind of, not person, there's lots of them, but really great organization to engage with to make sure that you have a better understanding of kind of what you can do in that situation. You know, knowing hotlines and things like that is always helpful. If it is a student, you can refer them to Tamika and I, and we can work with them. Let's say like they're being trafficked and they have a whole slew of things that they need to get through. We can sit down with them and help them work through those options, build rapport with those students to try to help them get out of that situation and to get into safety. Another thing we encourage is to be patient and go slow. I know that a lot of times in the medical profession, you've got a bunch of patients, you've got a lot of people you need to see. I've had multiple exams done where a doctor didn't even look at me in the face. So that's hard for me as someone who doesn't identify as a survivor. So now imagine if you have someone with all this complex trauma. Being patient with them and going slow can be really helpful. When we're talking about power and control, whether it's survivors of domestic violence or human trafficking, the worst thing we can do is to not provide that person with options or to make decisions for them. In that case study, it's a little bit different, right, because it's a minor. But what we want to do is try to take power and control and offer it back. So when I'm working with students and they tell me something's happened to them, I ask them, what does tomorrow look like for you? What would your ideal next week be? How can we get there? Here are the options. Do any of them sound okay to you? Do you want a second to think about it? Should I come back? Right? Giving people a chance to just breathe and be heard is so important. Even if they decide not to engage with you, they might engage with the next social worker, they might engage with the next doctor. And then letting the patient name the experience. If you tell someone you are a survivor of domestic violence, you are in danger, that person's gonna be like, what? No, I'm not. No. And they're gonna immediately recede into their shell. We, again, with power and control, we let people name their experience. A student can come to me, describe human trafficking in perfect detail. I do not say the word human trafficking until they do. I do not say the word sexual assault until they tell me they've been sexually assaulted. If they say I had a bad experience, we're going with a bad experience.
Exactly.
Right? If they ask me what I think, maybe I'll pull up some definitions and put it in front of them, be like, what sounds best to you? Do any of these explain your experience? Right? Do they seem eager for help? Are they resistant? So just reading them and figuring out what they need.
Exactly. And also taking the time to be human. This is my big thing. Because a lot of times I know that you're going to be working in situations where you got to get in and get out, you got things you have to do, but when you're coming across a situation of a person who may potentially be impacted by human trafficking or domestic violence, we have to take the time to be human. And what I mean by being human is just being empathetic. Listening, like Dana said, helping them, well, not helping them, but allowing them to name their experience. And also, like Dana also mentioned, giving them their power and control back and listening and letting them know that, hey, I'm interested in what you have to say. And then asking for permission. And what I mean by that, because you're going to be doing examinations of people, and so you may have to touch an arm, you may have to, move a shirt over here, whatever. Let them know in this process what I'm about to do. So I'm about to look at your wrist. Is that okay? I need to take your blood pressure. Is that okay? I need to feel your pulse. I'm just going to put my hand right here, even if you have to demonstrate on your own self, because I guarantee you, if they've been through traumatic experiences, any type of unsolicited touching is going to be triggering for them. So the human side of it is to make sure that we are not doing anything that can potentially be triggering for anyone who has had these experiences. And I know that sometimes it does take a different mindset when you get into those situations, because a lot of times you're under some kind of pressure to get things done. Of course, you got people to see, and we understand that. But when you have an idea that this may be going on or they may be experiencing this, that's when sometimes we have to put on just like a different cap, a different hat to say, okay, let me take the time, let me breathe first and take the time to see what is going on. Let them name their experience and give them that power and control back, and so that they feel a little bit safer and they may want to give you the information that you're looking for.
And I realized I forgot to put one on here. But if someone tells you that something bad has happened to them, believe them.
That's it.
So we put together this wheel. We based it on the Duluth model, which is what the other power and control wheels were based on. But we're not going to go through this in a lot of detail. We've kind of touched on some of these, but these are just some things that you can keep in mind to try, instead of maintaining power and control in your interaction with that client, to try to, model this version of equality, right? And so letting them have more say into what's going on in this exam room or in this interaction that they have. So if you have any questions about any of these, or if you want more copies of this, we made this. We are happy to send it. Just let us know. So this is our contact information. That email at the top is our confidential email, and so we are the only two people that have access to it. So if you have any private concerns, send them there. You'll also reach both of us, so you don't have to type in both of our emails. We do have 2 locations. We are at Monroe Park campus, but we are also here at MCV. And so we do hold hours about once a week in our counseling center, which is in the VMI building. But we're always happy to come down. It takes 10 minutes to just catch the pulse and come down and meet with a student. So if you have a concern and it's appropriate to call us, or you just need us to come see you and chat and drink coffee, we both love coffee, we're happy to do so. So just let us know.
Does anyone have any questions? We are done. We want to keep our time. So we do
Yeah,
have
we
about 3 minutes for
yeah, and we
questions.
started a
Does
little bit
anybody
late,
have
too.
any questions about what we talked about or kind of what we do? All right, so if everything is clear, we do thank you for your time today and enjoy the rest of your training.
Thank you. We also have some extra pamphlets, and our cards are up here. So if you need them, please feel free to come grab some. Thanks, y'all.
It's good to see you.
So next we're going to be doing a yoga break very quickly. It's just meant to be kind of a relaxation moment. Today's talks have been kind of heavy, so we just want to take a moment for self-care. And Victoria Kaiser, fourth-year medical student, will be doing that. And then after that, we'll get lunch set up, and we'll do a little lunch break, okay? All right, I'm just going to get the music started.